Look at this blueprint taking shape. It is tempting to think of a successful corporation as a natural byproduct of growth, an organic evolution of buying and selling. The reality is mechanical. A company is a synthetic legal construct that does not exist in nature. It requires precise adherence to statutory law to function. To forge this construct, the creators must execute a rigid sequence of procedures dictated by the Companies Act. Missing a single step invalidates the entity. This timeline maps the mandatory path from an abstract idea to a functioning corporation. It requires moving through 4 distinct nodes: promotion, incorporation, capital subscription, and commencement. The legal objective of this sequence is the creation of a separate legal identity. The law begins to treat this paper structure as a distinct person. Because this entity is legally separate from its founders, it possesses perpetual succession. Human founders will retire or pass away, but the legal entity continues its existence regardless of their mortality. This strict legal sequence grants an intangible business concept the authority to own property, enter binding agreements, and command capital. The process begins at the first node on our timeline, promotion. This is the domain of the promoter, the human initiator who draws up the first drafts of the corporate architecture. In practical terms, the promoter executes the groundwork. They identify a market opportunity, secure the prospective company's name, and hire professionals for foundational paperwork. This diagram shows the required stress tests. Before filing legal documents, the promoter must validate the concept through 3 specific feasibility studies: technical, financial, and economic. Technical feasibility ensures the raw materials and technology exist. Financial viability confirms the required capital can be raised, while economic feasibility dictates whether the enterprise can return a profit at scale. To secure preliminary funding, the promoter faces a legal paradox: signing contracts and managing money for a company that does not yet exist. Because an agent or trustee requires a principal to act on behalf of, and the company has not been formed, the promoter cannot claim the legal protections of being an agent. Instead, the law binds the promoter in a fiduciary relationship, a bond based on trust and absolute candor. This fiduciary obligation prevents the promoter from making secret profits. If they realize a gain while securing land or assets for the unformed company, they must disclose every cent to the future shareholders. Promotion builds the conceptual and financial framework. However, the business possesses 0 independent legal power until it breaches the next threshold. That boundary is established in the second stage, incorporation. Here, the promoter's ideas are locked into a binding legal perimeter. This schematic details the dual governance framework. On the left, the Memorandum of Association, or MOA, forms the rigid outer shell. It holds 6 required clauses: name, registered office, objects, liability, capital, and association. The Objects Clause defines the entity's absolute authority limits. Inside that shell sits the second document, the Articles of Association. This serves as the entity's internal operating system. The AOA governs the internal mechanics. It dictates the rules for how shares are transferred, how votes are weighted, and the procedure for issuing dividends. The hierarchy is strict. The MOA is the supreme mandatory constitution that protects outside creditors. The AOA is subordinate, managing internal company procedure. With both documents drafted, the promoter submits the MOA, the AOA, and the formal consent of the initial directors to the Registrar of Companies for verification. Once the architecture is verified, the registrar issues the Certificate of Incorporation. This certificate provides undeniable proof of legal existence. Courts accept this document as confirmation that the company is a real entity. The moment this certificate is stamped, the legal separation is complete. The promoter is no longer personally liable for future corporate contracts. At this milestone, the shield of limited liability takes effect. Shareholders' personal assets are legally severed from the debts of the corporation. Incorporation marks the moment the concept gains legal autonomy. The business now functions as an independent actor, possessing its own rights and responsibilities in the economy. Post-incorporation, the procedural sequence branches depending on the entity's legal classification. Private companies have generally completed their mandatory steps and can typically begin operations immediately upon receiving their certificate. Public companies must navigate a more complex trajectory. To raise funds, they enter a third stage, capital subscription. Within this route, the company issues a prospectus, broadcasting an appeal to the public markets to subscribe to its shares. The prospectus is a formal invitation to invest. It is heavily regulated and details the capital structure, objectives, financial history, and inherent risk factors of the enterprise. In response to this broadcast, prospective investors file formal applications to purchase pieces of the entity. The capital flows back to the company, but it must hit a regulatory threshold known as the minimum subscription. This threshold proves that the market supports the business proposition. If applications fail to reach this volume, the subscription fails and the funds must be returned. Only upon securing the minimum subscription can the company officially allot shares, distributing ownership to the public investors. This clears the path to the fourth and final stage, commencement of business. A public company is legally forbidden from starting operations or exercising borrowing powers until it has finalized these capital formalities and secured all required regulatory clearances. Incorporation births the entity, while capital subscription and commencement provide the legal authorization to scale operations using outside funds. Looking at the completed corporate architecture, the logic of the Companies Act becomes clear. Feasibility studies validated the idea, the MOA and AOA established legal boundaries, and the prospectus provided the mechanism to inject capital into the system. This table isolates the roles of the humans overseeing the machine. A clear line divides the timeline at the moment of incorporation. The promoter operates before incorporation as the foundational architect. The director steps in once the legal entity exists to manage it as a permanent concern. This structure mirrors the governance documents. The MOA provides the permanent power limits, while the AOA dictates the management protocols used by those directors. A business idea relies on individual human agency. A corporation replaces that vulnerability with a durable legal framework. These four stages execute the legal engineering required to create a synthetic economic engine, resulting in a structure built to outlive its human architects.